Welcome back to AAKP's 6th Annual Policy Summit. I'm Ed Hickey, President of AAKP. Thank you for joining our discussion on issues impacting living organ donation and living donor protections. This is a two-part panel where we'll focus on our first discussion on current legislation supporting this issue, the Living Donor Protection Act. We will begin our session shortly with our special guest. The legislation is specifically written to prevent ongoing and future job and insurance discrimination towards courageous living organ donors, solely because they make the decision to save a life. For over a decade, AAKP has worked alongside our kidney community allies and elected congressional leaders to solve this issue. This is a serious concern, and it is consistently cited by patients, transplant professionals, and organ donors is a major barrier to increased kidney donation. The language in the bill reflects a consensus solution developed by a comprehensive range of stakeholders, including organ donors, kidney patients, the insurance industry, transplant professionals, nephrologists, and many other advocacy organizations. The legislation will also codify, through Congress, expanded job protections for living donors extended in 2018 under the Family Medical Leave Act. The issue of increased protections for living kidney donors has been central to this policy summit since we launched this event in 2018. At that first policy summit, we were honored to host the Chief of Staff of the U.S. Department of Labor as a special guest to announce a decision by the Secretary of Labor and the department's Wage and Hour Division to extend the FMLA to living organ donors. This was a historic victory and milestone for the kidney community and a sign of other historic kidney policies that would follow from the executive branch, including the executive order on advancing American kidney health, authored by Secretary Alex Azar in 2019. At each of our subsequent policy summits, we have kept a clear focus on the need for living donor protections and the removal of barriers to organ donation. Now, 6 years later, we are again on the cusp of success as we work with our allies to secure passage of the bipartisan Living Donor Protection Act. I am honored to now introduce our very special guest, the Honorable Gerald Nadler, member of the U.S. House of Representatives from New York. Congressman Nadler is not only a national champion for kidney health, but also the architect and lead co-sponsor of this bill. Representative Nadler has demonstrated tremendous consistency, determination, and collegiality in forging a bipartisan congressional consensus to do more for living organ donors, and his commitment has never wavered. Representative Nadler took time out of his busy schedule to answer several questions about this important legislation. Let's go ahead with our guest, Representative Nadler. How have the individual stories of your constituents living with kidney disease or in need of a kidney donation and the stories of living donors impacted or resonated with you on a personal level?
Thank you, Ed, for your kind introduction and the opportunity to appear at this policy summit for patients and living donors. And thank you to the advocates with AAKP for being here with us today. Your tireless work advocating for the men, women, and children who suffer from kidney disease by supporting bills like the Living Organ Donor Protection Act or otherwise will save lives. Several years ago, I saw firsthand how families come together to fight kidney disease. A member of my staff had a baby boy who was born in kidney failure. After 2 years of dialysis, doctor visits, and hospital stays, she donated her kidney to save her son's life. Her son, Ozzy, is now 13 years old. Their journey has not been easy, and they still face struggles ahead. Through my staff members' experience, I learned more about the roadblocks and struggles living organ donors may experience. Many cannot get the time off they need to recover from donating an organ because their employers consider the procedure elective and not eligible for time off under the Family Medical Leave Act. Other donors have problems accessing life, disability, and long-term care insurance down the line because of their history as organ donors, even though organ donors tend to be healthier than the average American. That's why I decided to introduce H.R. 2923, the Living Donor Protection Act. This bill prevents insurance companies from discriminating against living organ donors, allows organ donors to access FMLA time to recover from surgeries. This aspect is codifying Department of Labor guidelines from 2018, directs HHS to update their materials on live organ donation.
How have their stories about overcoming barriers to living organ donation inspired you professionally and fueled your dedication and leadership on this issue in Congress?
Stories from living organ donors like my staff member or my constituents have fortified my resolve to finish the fight to pass the Living Donor Protection Act. We in Congress should be doing everything we can to eliminate these obstacles to living organ donation. Organ donation saves lives, which should be reason enough to support them. What many people don't know is that organ donation saves money too. It cuts healthcare costs by as much as 2/3 by eliminating the need for many long-term treatments for chronic illnesses.
So many Americans doubt that Congress can agree on anything or even work together. Yet through your leadership, you've been able to assemble consistent bipartisan support for this bill in the House and the Senate, including Senators Gillibrand and Cotton. Can you tell us how you and your team have been able to do this?
Simply put, when you have good legislation, it's a lot easier to get support for that legislation. This bill is good legislation. Saving lives while simultaneously saving money isn't a partisan issue. Everyone can support this bill. However, you're right that it's often difficult to find things to agree on in Congress. My colleagues on the other side of the aisle and I have an important similarity. We both have the job that we have because we want to improve the lives of our constituents. When you sit down with people who may disagree with you and explain to them why something will improve the lives of people in your community, like the Living Donor Protection Act will, and you're open to feedback, sometimes you can build that bipartisan support. That's why your advocacy is so important. I'm proud that this year the Living Donor Protection Act has more bipartisan leadership than it's ever had before. I'm thankful to my House colleagues who are leading this bill with me. Republican Representatives Murphy, Balderson, Curtis, and Miller Meeks, and Democratic Representatives Blunt, Rochester, Costa, and DeGette. I'm also thankful to our Senate colleagues introducing the companion bill, Senators Gillibrand and Cotton.
What do you say to colleagues who have yet to sign on to this bill? Do you encourage them to talk to their constituents, those living with kidney disease, or those who are trying to donate their kidneys to save the life of a loved one? Can you provide us with insights into what it is like for you to champion this legislation on Capitol Hill?
To my colleagues who haven't signed on to the Living Donor Protection Act yet, what are you waiting for? This is smart legislation that will save lives by lowering barriers to organ donation and save our healthcare system lots of money. It has the support of a wide range of stakeholder groups, including the passionate folks with AAKP. I recommend my colleagues who haven't signed on to this bill yet speak with their constituents who have experience with kidney disease or living organ donation. Talk to parents who have planned to donate an organ to their child to save that child's life, only to realize that because their employer treats organ donation surgery as elective, they would be ineligible for unpaid leave to recover from their surgery. Talk to organ donors in your district who have struggled with securing insurance coverage after their procedures because insurance companies have unfairly denied them coverage. We must lower these roadblocks to organ donation. The Living Donor Protection Act is bipartisan, cost-neutral, effective legislation that will get that done.
Finally, Congressman, for the patients, families, and others who have not yet raised their voice or taken action to support the Living Donor Protection Act, can you tell us how their phone call or letter in support of this bill helps you and your team gain new congressional allies and move closer to the passage of this legislation?
Your advocacy is incredibly important. When you share your stories with your representatives and how this legislation could improve your life, you help build interest and support in the bill. Thank all of you for your tireless work to support donors, recipients, their families, and those who are still waiting. I look forward to working with all of you to pass this bill and save lives.
During your time with us and for your leadership on the Living Donor Protection Act. We stand alongside you and your House and Senate co-sponsors, and will continue our national efforts to get this bill over the finish line. I would like to now move into our panel discussion with panelists Ms. Anita Seitz and Ms. Suzanne Ruff. Ms. Seitz is an advanced practice provider for transplant surgery and lead living donor transplant coordinator at the University of Virginia Transplant Department. She is joining us as a director and counselor at large from NATCO, the Organization for Donation and Transplant Professionals. And Ms. Suzanne Ruff, a good friend of mine, is the AAKP Treasurer, Ambassador, and published author of the book, The Reluctant Donor, and also a living kidney donor. Suzanne's family has been devastatingly impacted by polycystic kidney disease, and just recently, her family has seen the 11th kidney transplant within the family across 10 family members. Suzanne's father was also an original member of AAKP back when it was known as the National Association of Patients on Hemodialysis. We are honored to have both Anita and Suzanne with us to share a few remarks about the critical need for living donor protections and what this would mean for patients, donors, and the kidney community. Anita, I'll begin with you.
Hello, and thank you so much for having me with you today. Again, as he mentioned, my name is Anita Seitz, and I am a nurse practitioner with the University of Virginia Transplant Program in Charlottesville, Virginia. Today, I'm also here as a representative from the Board of Directors of NATCO, the North American Transplant Coordinators Organization. Since its formation in 1979, NATCO has been the leading national organization for donation coordinators and transplant coordinators to network, make connections, develop their professions, and to provide training for coordinators new to the transplant field. NATCO explores and embraces the latest in transplant technologies, as well as education platforms for delivering and sharing the expertise of our members across the country. NATCO's overarching goal is to equip transplant professionals with what they need to provide the most advanced care to transplant patients, donors, and their loved ones. We are thrilled to be part of today's event and discussions. Now, me personally, for the majority of my 25 years as a healthcare professional, I have been taking care of transplant recipients and/or their living donors. My primary focus, however, is the care of what I refer to as the most special patient population. Those patients are living donors. Why are living donors so special? They are in the unique position where they have chosen to undergo an incredibly thorough evaluation process and eventually a major surgery for the health benefit of another person. There is no medical need for a donor to have this surgery. They derive no medical benefit themselves. There are certainly emotional and personal benefits, however, to seeing a loved one or friend come off of dialysis and/or to have a better quality of life and improved overall health. Donors are the heroes of transplant. Without them, we cannot transplant anyone. Living donors in particular, however, give the ultimate gift to improve another individual's life. Why are living donors so vital to the future and success of transplant, you might ask? With nearly 90,000 people waiting for kidney transplants in the United States, there are simply not enough deceased donors to meet that demand. This has been the case for decades. This is not new information. The transplant community has years of data to demonstrate the advantages of living donor kidney transplant over deceased donor transplantation. One of those advantages is a decreased waiting time. Patients can wait 7 to 10 or maybe even more years than that waiting for a deceased donor kidney. Many of them will die waiting. In addition, we know that living donor kidneys typically just start to work right away, and that they last longer than those from deceased donors. Kidneys from living donors can last 20 or more years for some patients. Another concept to recognize is that with each living donor kidney transplant that we perform, that is one less patient on the list who is vying for those all too few deceased donor organs. So it essentially frees up a deceased donor kidney for another patient who is patiently waiting. Kidney disease and kidney failure affects people from all ages, stages, and walks of life. Therefore, living donation impacts people from all walks of life as well. I could share with you countless stories of how a living donor kidney transplant has allowed a patient to reach milestones that they would not have been able to had they been sitting on dialysis, waiting for a deceased donor organ to come their way. For example, a young woman who had recently graduated from college donated to her father, and in less than a year, he was able to walk her down the aisle and dance with her at her wedding with a new spring in his step. Or the father who donated to his toddler daughter and was able to keep her from having to start dialysis at all. There is the anonymous or Good Samaritan donor who called our center one day wanting to donate to whomever she was the best match for on our waiting list. And her recipient, who has now been able to start nursing school because she is no longer spending 12 hours a week on dialysis. They have since met each other and their families and have remained in close contact. Or finally, the wife that was not a compatible donor for her husband, but they agreed to enter the paired exchange registry, whereby they were part of a kidney swap that involved multiple patients in multiple transplant centers around the country. He was able to go back to work and become an even better pickleball player with his new lease on life. These stories and the stories of living donor transplantation across our nation are unique in their impact. They are life-changing, and they remind me of the hope and the goodness that still exists all around us. As I stated a few minutes ago, living donors really are the most special patients. We owe it to them, but also to the recipients waiting, to remove disincentives and barriers to donation. For example, if a potential donor is concerned that their job will not be there for them after recovery, they may not be able to go on and proceed with donation. In addition, the fear of having an impact on insurability due to having been a living donor is not one to take lightly. Eliminating these types of obstacles to living donation will allow more donors to be secure in their decision to donate, therefore increasing the number of living donors and reducing the wait list, all while allowing for better transplant recipient outcomes. To be a small part of the journey that living donors take to give another person, whether it's a friend, a family member, or even a perfect stranger, a chance at life is an honor and privilege for me and for all of us in the transplant community. Thank you again for allowing me to share my passion and the passion that NATCO has for living donation.
Thank you very much, Anita. We appreciate your remarks, and I'd like to turn the floor over to my good friend Suzanne Ruff to share her story with us. Suzanne.
Thank you, Ed, for that introduction and for all of our viewers today. I'm very pleased to participate in AAKP's 6th Annual Policy Summit. My story is that I would not be a living kidney donor today if it was not for what I lived through back in 1966. In June of that year, my favorite aunt suffered from kidney failure. She was requested an autopsy after her death because her mother, my grandmother, had died of the same symptoms in the 1940s. The autopsy revealed my aunt suffered from polycystic kidney disease, a hereditary disease. I was a young girl then, and we called my aunt Sister Mike. She was a Roman Catholic nun, but not your typical nun. She was funny, she loved to swim, and she was full of mischief. When her kidneys failed, Medicare didn't cover dialysis back in the 1960s. There was a waiting list for a dialysis machine. She didn't want the convent to bear the expense of dialysis. She also thought that someone with a family deserved her place on the spot. So she removed her name and died a few weeks later at the age of 45. Since Sister Mike's death, I witnessed my aunts and uncles, my mother and my sisters and my cousins suffer and deal with this disease. I knew what my sister's life would be like when she collapsed in renal failure, and I watched my mother endure 10 years of dialysis. Sister Mike taught me courage and grace by her inconceivable bravery. When my sister collapsed, I told her I'd give her one of my kidneys. As a living kidney donor, I can still remember the anxiety I felt about the surgery to donate a kidney, even now, after 20 years. I remember the fear that I had never had surgery, the fear of being cut by a scalpel, the fear that I might even die. Would my life be the same after surgery? Would I be able to hike, ride a bike, and swim? Donating my kidney was one of the scariest, most terrifying, and yet exhilarating things I have ever done to save the life of another. Data 20 years ago, when I donated, was scarce. Social media was not available. Answers to my questions about long-term effects of donating were non-existent. Answers to questions about whether or not it would affect my job, my career, and my future insurability. Today, nephrologists and patients approaching kidney failure are encouraged to find a living donor. The transplant waiting list is very long. There are simply not enough donors. Patients are now being told to find a living donor before total kidney failure as a better way to achieve success and long-term health. Polycystic kidney disease has reared its ugly head in the fourth generation of my family, and now little ones are being born within the fifth generation. Since I donated, 4 other family members have stepped up to donate, including my cousin's 27-year-old niece. He's a twin, and he was a lieutenant in the Chicago Fire Department. They'll be celebrating their 4th transplant anniversary, kidneyversary, on Monday. His twin brother had a transplant a few weeks later, and his wife graciously stepped up to be his donor. My sister, 20 years ago, returned to work after she received my kidney in the ESL department at her high school and worked until she retired. All of the living donors also returned to work, saving each of their recipients from years of dialysis. And those twins, right now their older brother is on dialysis, and he's a priest. They run in our family. If living donation is being encouraged by the medical doctors, it is not right for a donor to be ostracized, discriminated against, or denied coverage for their incredible act of courage. And here's my straight talk. Why in heaven's name would someone, like my 27-year-old cousin's daughter, step up or literally lay down their life to save the life of another if they are subjected to rejection and discrimination in the future by their insurance companies? She's 27. She has a long adult life ahead of her. More than anything, I work and I pray and I hope for a cure for kidney disease. I also hope and pray for new innovations like developing an artificial kidney and xenotransplantation. Not just for families like mine, but for anyone in kidney failure. At this point in time, living donation is the best option for a loved one and to have a better way of life, not on dialysis. Even though, as Sister Mike would tell you, dialysis is a great invention, but it's expensive, and living donation is the answer right now. Please protect living donors, and thank you most of all for listening to my family stories.
Thank you very much, Suzanne. There's no more powerful testament than the lived experiences and the practical implications positive legislation can do. For our remaining panel time, I'd like to open it up for a couple of quick questions. Anita, I'll start with you. As a healthcare professional on the front lines of supporting patients and families through the transplant process, what would the passage of the Living Donor Protection Act mean for the work you do in the efforts of NATCO?
That's a great question. Thank you for that. So much of what we do in the field of transplant is patient education and really ensuring that these patients, and in my case, donors specifically, know what the potential risks are, not just the risks of the surgery, but right now, unfortunately, we have to communicate with them. There could be a risk of difficulty obtaining insurance. There could be some financial risk of not being approved under the FMLA. It would erase those very hard conversations because I do know that impacts some potential donors' decision and also their ability to proceed with this. Now, I will say, especially with some of the stories that I share today, those people would have taken that risk regardless, and they did take that risk regardless because of their desire to help their loved one, but they shouldn't be placed at that risk. And as I mentioned, removing those barriers, they'll be more secure, and that's one less thing they have to worry about. So those are the biggest impacts, is not having to have those very tough and kind of unknown. We don't know. We don't have a crystal ball, but this is what you could face. And having kind of a limited ability to be able to fix that in the moment.
Thanks, Anita. And as Congressman Nadler said, and you said, this really does impact people's lives, and it will make people's lives better, and the decision that they make to donate an organ a lot easier. Suzanne, turn it over to you. I don't think we can stress enough that policy impacts people. So how important is it to make your voice heard on issues impacting kidney care? And what does it mean to you to be a kidney voter?
Well, as I mentioned, that the fourth generation of our family is experiencing kidney failure now. And I look back on I never wanted anyone to forget what those who went before us with kidney disease did to get us to where we are today. Working for AAKP and for kidney patients is sort of my goal in life right now. It's to make the next generation stronger and better, and to have our voices heard. Working with all of you at AAKP is an honor, and having someone listen to a patient's story is powerful, and it helps to make people learn. I remember telling Sister Mike's story and hearing a nurse come up to me and said, I had no idea that Medicare did not at one point in time cover dialysis. So my whole goal in life is to try to use our family's stories to make it better for the next generation. And I do believe that's pretty much what each patient would like to do. It takes away that powerless feeling you have when you're a patient, and those dark nights when you can't sleep and you're worried. And by getting involved, by having your voice heard through all of the platforms that are available for you to research today after being on this and listening to this panel, that will get you where you need to be, and it will take all the pain not completely away, but you'll feel like you're making a difference, and you'll feel better.
Thank you very much, Suzanne. Your words are so inspiring, and also provide us with the urgency we need to call upon our elected officials to pass the Living Donor Protection Act. And with that, I'd like to close this panel discussion. Our gratitude goes out to our special guest representative, Nadler, and panelists, Ms. Anita Seitz and Ms. Suzanne Ruff. As we move to a short break before our part two of our discussion, I encourage you to use this time to take action. All the links you need to make an impact are on this event platform. Visit the session box, click on Take Action, and you'll be directed to AAKP's Living Donor Protection Act campaign, where you can join hundreds of other people today by sending a letter to your representatives asking them to support the Living Donor Protection Act today.